Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you for another Intersections. The first intersection this year was with Libras, and today is English. So, welcome, everyone. We are very, very happy to have you all here with us. My name is Fabielle Cruz. I am one of the teachers here at Centro Universitário Internacional Uninter from Letras Inglês. And our intersections is a conversation about different topics that are of interest of teachers, that are interesting for students, for everyone. And today our topic is a very special one, right? It's about language and walls, which metaphorically is our way of thinking about linguistic and cultural barriers or obstacles that we face as teachers, as students. So, welcome, Laura, Graziele, Janair, Rubiana, Ingrid. Ingrid, it's nice to see you here again. Jerônima, Raquel, Cláudia, and of course, my coworkers, Professor Jefferson and Professor Teca is also very nice to have you here with us. So I'm going to introduce to you guys today our special guests. They are very special people that I had the opportunity to meet during Carnival time, during the collaborative field experience that we had here at Uninter, that we had 15 Brazilian students and 15. Sorry, everyone, technical difficulties. We can't do something without the thrill of something going wrong. Good evening, Gabi. Good evening, Rafa, and welcome to be here with us today.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Hi, I was wondering if it was me or if it was you, and then I was like, Jesus, what's
Yeah,
happening?
yeah, no, it was me. For sure, it was me. So Gabi is a student from Letras Inglês, right? So Gabi is a student with us here, but I had the opportunity, like I said, to meet her during the collaborative field experience. And Rafa actually had the same opportunity in the US that I had. He is a Fulbrighter like me, and he went to the same university I went, but before me. So I have some special connections with both Gabi and Rafa. So I'm gonna ask first Gabi to introduce a little bit about yourself, and then Rafa. Can you be?
Of course, thank you. So I'm Gabi. I'm 36 years old, almost 37, and I started learning English when I was about 9 years old. And my biggest passion at the time were the Backstreet Boys. So I wanted to know what they were singing about. And at the time, many years ago, before Google, I couldn't just go online and learn it and get the translation. So I had to do it word by word using a book, a dictionary, to translate the songs. This is actually my third degree with Uninter. I also have post graduation in education, right? And this is the third time I come back to Uninter because I think it's my new Backstreet Boys, my new passion.
It's good, you know. So many people started with Backstreet Boys when we were in the 90s, you know. Spice Girls and Backstreet Boys were everything.
Exactly.
Rafa, your
Nowadays,
turn.
sorry,
Yeah, Gabi, go ahead.
it's okay.
And I started later than Gabby, actually. For me, I was a decent English language student in school and high school, but then I started to study English for real when I went to college. I've always known that I wanted to be an English teacher. This was something, I mean, I've always known I wanted to be a teacher. I was not sure about which area I was going for. One of my ideas was physics. Thank God I didn't decide for that, because I know I wouldn't be happy, or as much as happy as I am now as an English teacher. But I also started my second degree a few months ago. I decided to go for sociology, also at Uninter, after the collaborative field experience. I met so many wonderful people, and I decided that I wouldn't wait for anything else to happen to start studying sociology for real. And nowadays I work teaching English, Portuguese for foreigners, and I also have a very intense work with transgender students at an NGO here in Porto Alegre. So this is what I've been doing recently.
Well, they both do amazing work, guys. I had the opportunity to talk to them a lot. And honestly, the topic that we're going to talk today started basically because of our experience, right? In during our time in collaborative field experience, because as students and as teachers, we have to mention that it's not easy. It's not osmosis, right? We don't learn from, from a minute. We actually learn throughout our lives, and as teachers, I think we never stop learning, right? So our topic today is exactly that: languages and walls. So I wanted to start asking Gabi and Rafa, what are some experiences during the CFE that you had, that I actually had too, that you felt that language was a barrier, or language or cultural aspects, because most of the time for us, we were translating, we were helping our Canadian friends. It was just so hard to translate, right? Just so difficult to explain things. What do you think about it?
Um, I think the most difficult thing was oftentimes conveying the emotion as well. Because as we were doing a lot of work as translators, we were focusing on the language, but more like the vocabulary, the structure of it. And then it becomes a problem because language is not just a structure, it's not just an adjective, it's also the emotion. So conveying and showing this emotion that the people who weren't speaking Portuguese, for those who don't know, we visited many indigenous communities. So we were doing the translations for the Canadian students to communicate with the people in these indigenous communities. And oftentimes, in the beginning, I was so focused on the vocabulary that I would forget what I was translating, so experiencing it as well, not just being a translator, but also being part of it. For me, that was probably the most challenging in the beginning. But as we had 10 days, we could adjust and learn from our experiences as well.
I think that just as much as Gabi mentioned, the idea that maybe I felt it a little bit harder on me on the first days because I was still in the teacher mindset, I felt that, well, I am one of the English teachers here. There are Brazilian students, they are extremely competent in language-wise. They are extremely competent in their areas of study. But I had in me the idea that, well, I have to be a reference. If someone needs help, I need to be ready to jump in the conversations. And then after a few days, I noticed that, well, this is not exactly what I'm doing here, and this is not exactly the purpose of the program, right? But also something that really called my attention was most of the times when we were having conversations with the Canadian students and professors, they would bring the idea, that they were so amazed by the fact that the communities that we have visited, the indigenous communities here in Paraná, there in Paraná, because I'm in Porto Alegre now, the indigenous communities, they had the chance, or they were making a huge effort to keep their own native language. And the Canadian students, they mentioned many times in our conversations and in the conversations with the chiefs from the communities that it was something that they have lost in some cases in their original communities, in their nations in Canada, and how much it was making it more difficult for them to fight for their rights now, because in the past they were not given the chance to even choose if they wanted to keep their language or not. And we know that it happens in many other communities, indigenous communities in Brazil, in South America. So it was something that called my attention, because as a white man who has always spoken Portuguese in his family, not being able to speak my language was never in the horizon. And then I noticed that, well, language, we think about this idea of language and language barriers when we are language learners trying to access a knowledge from a language, but also sometimes we can think that language can be the wall to protect a community, to protect cultures, and to make sure that this culture keeps alive, even with all the external interferences, right?
Yeah, and I think that considering the idea of the indigenous communities, we had somewhat tough times translating things. I can say, for me, for myself, in one of the communities that we visited, the chief was shot, right? And he actually told me, like, can you translate that to them? And wow, I actually felt so emotional in that moment. I don't know if Gabi and Rafa remember, but I started choking up, and I was like, will I be able to translate that? And it's so hard. And the same thing happened in Paranaguá when we were talking about slavery. It was so difficult to translate. And actually, it wasn't a matter of translating a linguistic difficulty, but more of a cultural, a hard time translating something so, like, so much suffering, so much pain. How can you translate that? It's like Gabi said, how can you translate emotions in that way, right? And yes, Gabi, go ahead.
For sure. I was going to say, I actually remember when you mentioned this about the cacique in the community. I remember, and I remember you saying, "Oh, this is going to be very hard." You mentioned something like that before you translated what he had said, because it was such a huge impact on everyone who spoke Portuguese, and you could see on the facial expressions of the Canadian students and the professors there that they were like, "Oh, this is bad," like something, they are going to translate something bad, because everyone was reacting to it.
And also, of course, I also remember the moment. I remember I had to step back and go behind something to cry a little bit and come back. But also, many moments were so emotional. I remember when we visited Alessio, Jesus,
Laércio.
Chief
Laércio,
Laércio.
yes, when we visited Chief Laércio's community, and then it started to rain out of the blue. It was a sunny day. We were outside of their sacred place, and then it started to rain, and he decided to invite us in. And then we had a deep conversation there, and then we went down to visit their school inside the community. So many of these moments, it was not a matter of knowing the language or not knowing the language. Of course, sometimes there were specific terms, specific items of vocabulary that we needed to look for Fabi for help, or ask for someone or Jason to help us translate it better or more precisely. But the whole idea was filled with very heavy emotions all the time. And then putting it together, not being professional translators. We're language professionals, but we're not professional translators. We were not ready for that. And there's nothing that could make us ready for that, right? It was not the fact that maybe Fabi didn't tell us we would have to be dealing with very emotional stuff. It was the fact that life was happening. We were visiting places in which history plays a very important role, and in which history was not so kind to these people. So it was very impactful, I guess.
Yeah, like in Paranaguá, right? When we went through those places and then we were talking about slavery and we're talking about African people who were enslaved and brought here. And for me, that moment was, I think, the hardest part of it, translating all that suffering, all that pain. My goodness. Yeah. I still think about it sometimes and I think like, was I really able to do that? And did I convey, did my words convey what I wanted to say? Because I don't know, we don't want to minimize the feelings. At the same time, you're trying to translate and you want the person to understand. So it's difficult, right? And still thinking about it, but now considering as teachers and as learners, how do you feel it is when you are working with the language? Do you think it's the same idea? It's hard to translate culture because we talk about it all the time, right? That as teachers we need to bring culture, but authentic culture, not just the American British kind of thing that we are used to hearing, right? Adding more perspectives, go ahead.
I just think that Gabby will always start. No, go ahead, Gabby.
You guys
Okay.
decide. Whoever wants to speak, feel free.
So I'll go first now. Some things that I usually keep in mind, and it's so I always like talking to letras students, especially those who are going to work with English, because as Fabi mentioned, we are usually very focused on teaching American English or British English, right? Usually the schools we work at, they are either focused on one or the other, or our entire education, my entire education was based on American English. Doesn't mean that I speak American English. I speak Brazilian accented English, right? I speak something that I can do with the language that I know. Um, it's always, it was part of my education as an English teacher to think that, well, we have to teach culture, but nobody ever has told us exactly how to do that. And then after I finished my undergrad course, then I started to focus a little bit more on what is actually culture and how can I bring culture into my classroom. And I'm not saying that to blame my professors. They did an amazing job making me the professional that I am today. But I'm very happy to know that you guys have teachers, professors like Fabi, for example, who bring these ideas and who have had the chance to go through different experiences, because then you can have the chance to see it now when you're studying, getting ready to be a teacher, to be teachers, professors, whatever you want to be in the future, that you can have the chance to think about it from a different perspective. Of course, culture is talking about Disneyland, but it's not only that. Culture is talking about different cosmologies, how we see the world, how I present myself in the world, and how I place myself in this or that position, how I put myself, how I make myself available to people from different cultures, and how I'm open or not to people from different cultures. So, making this movement and understanding language, even our own language, even when we think about Portuguese, how do I accept people who are learning Portuguese and who are getting here, who are coming to Brazil? Immigrants or not, tourists or not, how do I deal with these people? Am I nice to them when they're making an effort to communicate in my language? Will I expect people to be nice to me when I'm trying to communicate in English? Will I help my students understand that being nice to people is the basics and we have to be that all the time? So I think this is important to keep studying about what is culture and how can we deal with this in the classroom, not only thinking about the culture of this or that country.
I think that's the ultimate teaching goal. That's the truth,
true.
right?
From my perspective, culture for many years, like Rafa mentioned, was Disney and Friends. I love Friends. Don't get me wrong, uh, but more and more people are realizing that, and teachers and students are realizing that culture is also learning why some people in some countries they are more direct in their emails, why people don't invite you over when you are visiting them because in some cultures that's not that common, why in some neighborhoods, in some countries, you go outside and there's nobody because people stay inside. They don't run on the streets like Brazilian kids do, you know. And reading, for example, before I knew about the Canadian students coming to Brazil, I was teaching about residential schools to my students, so I had already heard about it. So culture is not only teaching the fun stuff like Disney, but bringing also an article or a video or a song, and telling and showing students and asking questions as well, because culture is something you live. It's not something that you just speak about, but you ask people's perspectives as well. But you bring songs and you talk about the impact that song had. like uh, um, like I mentioned before, music really is like one of my passions. So for example, the impact that Beyonce had in the music business when she released an album and didn't tell anybody she was doing that, so there was a cultural shock worldwide, not just in Brazil, but worldwide. People were shocked that she had done that. So culture is all of those things combined, and there isn't just one right way of doing it, right? Culture, it's like when we talk about the different fruit, like we did on the train with the Canadian, when we talk about the different food, and that, for example, in Brazil, at least in our region, we eat avocado with condensed milk, right? But in the United States, especially in California, people like it on their toast. And for me, that sounded so like weird, freakish to eat on your toast with eggs. And then I try it and it's actually good. So all those things are culture. And you can use podcasts, songs, movies, recommending movies, series, news articles, Pinterest, Instagram. The reality of us today as professors and teachers and instructors is much better because we have more available resources than when we were students, and then when we were even students were self-taught, right? People who were learning by themselves. So all of those are really good ways of working culture in the class. Jokes, comedy, stand-up is also a really great stuff, a really great thing.
Yeah, that's true. And a good point. I think that I'll ask a bit for you to tell, you and Rafa can tell a little bit about it. But I think it's important for us to mention that people need to understand it. Bringing our own culture in L2, in this case in English, is also important. It's not just a matter like Rafa mentioned, I speak Brazilian English, Brazilian spoken English, right? And it's important to talk even about that. I remember when I was in the university and I studied about Langston Hughes, which is a poet, an African American poet, and he used it to write in African American English, which is completely different than the standard American English people expect. So these are cultural aspects, right, that are important for us to think about. Not only the US, UK dichotomy, I mean. And Gabi and Hafin, if you can you tell us a little bit about what was the experience with the fruits, with Barreado, with the cities, how you felt about it with the Canadians?
Okay, I'll go first on this one. So one of the funniest experiences, because I wasn't quite sure, was when we shared paçoquinha with them. They had never seen paçoquinha and guaraná. Every restaurant we went, they would have guaraná, and it's something that we take for granted because if I go downstairs, I can buy it at the nearest market, guaraná, like anytime. And they have been messaging us, sending us texts and photos and tagging us on Instagram because they found Guaraná in Canada. They were able to find it. So they are still drinking Guaraná, right? And some of them have already asked me to send paçoquinha to Canada. So it was very interesting to see their reaction. It was almost as seeing it through the eyes of like children, when children are discovering like new textures and new flavors, new things. It was very, very beautiful to see the excitement. And us, all of the students Brazil were from different states. So sometimes we would have like 3 or 4 people from the same state, but we were like from all over the place. So when one of our students, João Miguel, brought the fruit, there were things that other Brazilian students didn't know because he brought it from Rondônia, if I'm not mistaken. Rondônia, I think.
Yeah, he
And so,
brought from the Amazon, right? Amazonian fruits.
yeah, and people didn't know, and other Brazilian people were like, oh, so really? And then he was explaining, for example, about cashew and how some part of it is poisonous, and the Brazilian students were shocked. So we were learning as well. That was very fun. It was one of I think one of the highest points, really.
And Nicole screaming agua all the time. So Nicole was a Canadian, one of the Canadian students, and the first word she learned was agua. So every time she saw one of the Brazilians, she was always screaming agua. Another memory that I had that's a very interesting one was when we were sitting with only the Brazilians, the Canadian hadn't arrived yet, and you were talking about chimarrão as well. It was in my room. I think that's a good point as well among the Brazilians, right?
It was nice to see that, as Gabby mentioned, we were from different parts of the country. Also, we were from different parts in the same state sometimes, but it was not so common. I think it was me, Gabby, and
And Lana, who is also from Letras Inglês.
Isa?
yes, Lana and Isa.
And
Actually, we
Isa,
had four from Rio
four.
Grande do Sul,
Yeah.
exactly. But Lana and I, we live kind of close to each other. Gabi lives a little bit farther away, and Isa, she lives on the border with Argentina and Uruguay, I guess.
Rafa,
So,
may I interrupt you just for a
sure.
second? Guys, it's Taylor, who were one of the Canadian advisors. Taylor, we miss you. Sorry, Rafa, just a quick mention here, an honorary
Taylor took
mention.
some of the amazing photos that we have from the trip. Thank you, Taylor, for
Yes.
that. And also, it was nice to experience some of those new things together, right? Most of us, I think, all of us, maybe the Brazilian students, we had never been to an indigenous community. We had never visited those museums that we visited in Paranaguá or in Curitiba, even, right? Or those places that we went together. So it was very nice to share something that was supposed to be from our culture, but that we had not experienced yet. And then experiencing that with people who are from a different place, a very different place, with a very different background. It was very uh, I don't even have the words to describe it. It was something that I wouldn't have the chance to live that if it wasn't for this opportunity, right?
And maybe Rafa, you will share this with me, but it's different when you go. So, for example, in Fulbright, as Fulbrighters, we go to the US and we teach Brazilian Portuguese, for example, and we have some cultural experiences, those kinds of things. But it's completely different when you go and you teach your language and when you host someone and you present your language. I think it's your language or culture. Maybe Gabi has the same experience. It's something completely different, right?
Also, as English language teachers in Brazil, sometimes we have this idea that people who are native English speakers, they will not care about your culture. They just want to come here and enjoy whatever the country has to offer, and that's it. But I could see, and this was one of my internal concerns. I was afraid that we would meet them and they would be so not interested in our culture. And they were the exact complete opposite. Like they wanted to learn absolutely everything they could in every single situation we shared. So it was also nice to see that we have the tendency of wanting our students to be this kind of curious. And then it was so amazing receiving guests here, people here who were willing to learn from us and with us, right? It was not a unidirectional. They were not coming here to look and see how we live and go home. They wanted to share, and we actually created bonds that are going to last forever, I guess, right? We made friends that are going to be friends for life.
I don't know if Gabi wants to compliment, but I think that That's something that a good example of that was when Rafa was mentioning about the rain and the sacred place in Laercia's community. And one of the most amazing things that happened is when we were inside, we had some students, some Canadian students, and they started crying. They were feeling very emotional. And we all came to our senses that we were, south, south and north, north, but we were still the same. We shared the same roots, we shared the same beliefs, we shared the same this spiritual connection, something that you cannot put into words, right? And I remember one of the girls saying like what I heard, the smell of tobacco inside of the sacred place, it reminds me of home. So then I was saying, okay, we are, down south in Brazil, and they came from the northern part of the north, hemisphere, and we are still the same. So it's something amazing, right? Just to have this connection.
And also, they mentioned some things about the artwork as well. That they said, "Oh, this is something we would do like from a different perspective, but this is something we have there." So that was really really interesting indeed. I think for
We lost
connections.
Fabi.
Yes. No, come back, come back. Also mentioning about the cultural aspects of the experience. We also visited some museums, and one of the first experiences when we were doing, and I just want to say how important that was before the Canadian students came to Brazil, before they arrived, because it was kind of a journey. There was like some flight issues, some problems with airplanes. So we were all just the Brazilian students in this activity. We did about language, about how important words are in languages, and how important that was for Brazilian students to connect. So we had that opportunity before we were able and we were ready for the Canadian students. We had that opportunity as well. We had our dinner, the Brazilian students, and the same situation happening. Even though I'm a white woman from South Brazil, I was able to connect with students who didn't look like me, from all parts of our country, and that was like something really interesting. And I must confess, I was a little nervous because I thought like, we speak different, like will I sound funny, like what will happen, you know and it was completely the opposite. We bonded so fast.
It was an exchange experience inside our own country. With we lost Fabi for good now.
Oh, she will return.
She'll be
Sure.
back.
I have faith.
I
Yeah,
think are we still on? If
I
she's not
think
here,
so. I think so.
so what do
Let
we
me
do
check.
now?
I guess we can. Well, I guess we can wait a little bit, like for. Oh, she's back.
Oh yeah, she's back.
Okay. We were freaking out a little bit.
Internet, today
What do we do? What
internet
do I
is
wear?
just
What do we do?
internet is testing me.
Right.
Okay, so for us to head now towards the end of it, can you give us an insight, an idea, a suggestion for people who are watching us or who are gonna watch it later, about, once again, about culture in language learning, culture in language teaching? What do you feel about it? So a final thought.
I'll go first again. So I think that the biggest lesson is not just going to one place for information or for material, whether you are a student or a teacher, professor. You need to get things from different perspective, because the same people who live here in Santa Cruz do Sul, where I'm from, we have different perspectives, right? So culture is not just like this is the American culture, or this is the Canadian culture. You have different people inside different cities. You have a wealth of things to learn. So don't always listen to the same podcast. If there's one you like, okay, listen to this one, but also listen to others. Don't only watch the same videos on YouTube or the same kind of movies. And consistency, not just, oh, I watched a British movie, so now I know everything about it. No, consistency. You have to watch and you have to learn and you have to interact. I was taught by one of my classmates in Letras about Discord. Thank you, Kennedy, for that. I didn't know of its existence. So it's also a great way to practice and communicate. You have bad people and good people there, but it's a great resource to learn and practice the language as well.
Just like we have good people and bad people everywhere. Right? I think that for me, what's being like a game changer when I think about culture and when I try to bring it to my classes is the fact that I want to access the things that I'm interested in other languages as well. So if I am interested in human rights in Portuguese, I also want to have access to what people are discussing in different countries from different perspectives about human rights using English as well. So I noticed that it was a game changer for my students too, when I started asking them, what are you interested in? What are the things that motivate you to keep learning more about whatever topic you like? And then it's always amazing when I have a student come into my class or when I meet a student and he or she tells me, I started to study whatever I like in English and I watched the whole video about it and I could understand it. Or when I see that my students are motivated because they can see that English is not only a language that they have to learn for a test or they have to learn because they need a certificate, a proficiency certificate, but also something that they can use to make themselves better, to improve themselves, to learn more, to have access to other points of view and other discussions. And this is much more interesting than the culture that we can learn from the dichotomy American English, British English.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I don't have words. I don't have anything to add after Gabi and Rafa's insight. So I think that with this, we can end this wonderful. Yes, I agree with Grazielli. This is an amazing. What are you interested in, right? What keeps you motivated? And that's so true, right? I think that the main point of being a teacher, but also being a student, is study what you like, right? And as teachers and as students, we are always learning. So I want to thank Gabi and Rafa so much for coming, for spending the time with us here. Thank you so much, both of you. I know that you are very busy people. You have many students, so thank you for taking the time and coming talk to us today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Fabi.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. So thanks to everyone who was here with us in our chat, all the Brazilian students, all the people from Uninter, all our invited guests. I know that Gabi and Rafa were able to invite some guests as well. And also, we want to thank all the CFE students who are also here, the advisors as well. So we have Taylor, we have Bonnie, Mateus was here with us, Isadora as well. So guys, thank you so much, all of you, for coming. We hope that you enjoyed this conversation. It's brief, it's so fast, but we want to thank all of you. So once again, guys, thank you all so much. Gabi, Rafa, it was a pleasure.
Thank
And you have my invitation to come back once again.
Sure, whenever you want.
Of course.
For sure. So guys, thank you so much, and we wish you all a wonderful weekend, because it's already Thursday, right? So we hope to see you again next time. Bye, guys.
Bye bye.
See you.
Thank you.